Amid hijab row in India, Sikh girl asked to take off her turban. Recently, in Mount Carmel College in Palace Vasanth Nagar, a 17-year-old baptized Sikh girl was allegedly asked to take off her turban while attending class. Lately, there has been a lot of controversy around students' religious garments at schools. Last year, 6 Muslim female students who refused to take off their hijab were barred from attending their classes. Mount Carmel College denied the allegations and clarified that they did ask the student to take off her turban, but did not bar her from joining her classes. On February 10th, the 3-judge high court in the state of Karnataka declared that the interim order regarding the hijab applies to colleges that have existing uniform code. Karnataka's high court is still hearing petitions submitted by Muslim students regarding this issue. The court stated that petitioners must prove beyond a reasonable doubt, quote, as to what is compulsory to be followed in Islam.
People are saying this is the same state. Is this the same state as what happened with that?
Yes.
Hijabi student? Okay.
Different city, same state.
And is this like a public school or a private school? How does this work?
I don't actually know that off the top of my head.
So they have a school uniform. This is pretty bold, by the way. I don't know if people understand.
Oh, well, that's why I had to cover this. Because I was like, oh, they asked a Sikh girl to take off her turban. Like,
guys, you don't mess with the Sikhs.
I was like, holy crap, they done did it now. Like, this is hijab situation has turned into a Pandora's box that I don't think India is prepared for. Because the logical conclusion of this is that, well, yeah, then she should have to take off her turban too. But we're not ready for that conversation.
No, guys, like, okay, you would expect for Indian schools to go after the hijab. Okay, you would like, of course, it's India, right? You do not expect Indian schools to go after the turban. Okay, this is like a red line that has been crossed. I don't know. Is there any backlash to this?
Yeah. What kind of a question is that?
I just had to. I don't want to assume. Because if I assumed, it would be like, I don't know, racism of lower expectations from the Sikh community, right? So what has been the backlash?
Well, so there was a huge backlash from this girl's father. It's become, a huge news story because of this. People have community leaders have come forth and just stated, how much this is perceived and received as an insult to the Sikh community. So it's just blown up. It's blown up.
Right. What has this, by the way, this is a completely separate school. Does this school also not let the hijab? I'm going to be consistent the other way around as well. Okay. I mean, I'm assuming this school will also not let. I mean, first of all, they didn't why would they not block her from attending classes? Would they block her from attending classes if she had a hijab? But it's still not consistent, right? Like, how come if you're wearing a hijab, you don't get to? I mean, this is a lot more consistent than what I assumed we would get to than before. But when it comes to a hijabi, you don't get to come to the class. But when you have a turban, you're asked politely to remove your turban, but you will still not be blocked from attending the class if you refuse, right? So it's still not consistent. But go on.
So here's a little bit of background. So for those who are not aware, we've been talking about this hijab controversy in India for a long time. If you don't know what we're talking about, go look on our channel. You can find it for the background. So the update is that there has been an interim order that's been passed or whatever at the moment that says that while the court still deliberates and really digs into this, in the meanwhile, we're ordering that we're disallowing religious symbols in that if you're wearing the hijab, you can't wear the hijab in classrooms. So at the moment, the hijab is not allowed to be worn at,
religious symbols, including turbans?
Well, this is always the exception. So
Okay.
that wait just a second. That's the larger background. And then so the background for this instance is, quote, the college said that the issue started when the deputy director of pre-university education North, who was visiting the college, noticed a group of hijab-clad Muslim women and had a word with them in his office about the Karnataka's wait, I always pronounce that wrong. Anyways, high court's order. The college clarified, quote, the reported incident happened after the girls prevented from wearing the hijab pointed to another student wearing the turban. In the interest of parity, the Sikh girl was asked about her religious symbol. She explained that the turban was necessary as she had been baptized. Her father wrote to the pre-university college confirming this. We understood the circumstances and supported her decision to wear the turban.
What the hell? This is not equal at all. Okay, so they're going after the turban mildly just because they want to be able to go after the hijab. So that like they're like, oh my god, I guess like, hey, remove your hijab. Or like, what about them? Like, damn it. Can you please remove your turban? No, okay. Okay, we asked them. Like that the intention is to go after the hijab. This is like this, you know, this is like trying to use secularism mostly to be just targeting Muslims, okay? But like even if eventually they like for the sake of consistency attempt to like attack the turban to some in a mild way, the goal was not that. The goal was like we be anti these Muslims. You know what I mean? That's what the goal is. Like guys, the intentions matter too. Like I would support like so. Harris is asking in the lecture, Armin, a few weeks ago, you said you'll support it if it includes Sikhs too. I predicted that they would eventually. Are you okay with it now? No, because I'm not okay with it now. First of all, because it's not consistent. Okay, they're like the way that they're going after turban is a lot milder and forced, and also like if there is, even if there is a blanket ban on all religious symbols, okay. If the goal was secularism in public schools, I would be like, yay, go for it, okay? But if the goal was like, we have to make Muslims feel not feel welcome in schools, and because of that, we also kind of have to ban all the other religious symbols, but the main goal was to be anti-Muslim, then even if you're consistent, if that was the intention, I would still not be in your favor because your goal was not secularism. Your goal was something else. You're just using secularism as a weapon, as a tool, right? But it's so obvious that they don't want to go after the turban. Their hands are being forced to go after the turban because people are calling them out that this is not about being progressive. This is not about being secular. This is not about having a religion-free environment when it comes to education. This is not about all of that. We're calling your bullshit out. You're just anti-Muslim. It's so obvious that you're like that. And because we're calling your BS out, you're like, hey, can you please move your turban? No, no, don't attack, please. Oh.
To be fair, I don't know, because you keep on saying, well, this is their intention. I don't know for this particular school how much of a vested interest they have in this. At the moment, they are under a court order.
Right.
So their hands are tied in that sense.
Why would they go after them? Okay, they are under a court order, okay? Why is there both when they have, if they have this court order, okay, and they already have female students with the turban and also female students with the hijab, why did the girls with the turban had to be pointed out to them? Why would we like, oh, we have court order, there's a hijab, there's some hijabi girls, let's go after them? Why did they have to point out, like, what about them for them to also go to after the turban, girls with the turban? Why was that not automatic because of the court order? I mean, it seems like the court order is even being enforced selectively, even though the court order is supposed to be about all religious symbols.
I mean, I don't have an answer for you. Well, probably likely because regarding this whole controversy, it has been surrounding the hijab. You know, like the Sikh turban has been taking a back burner for sure. It only really came up now. What's interesting though is, so I follow a bunch of lefty Indian pages on Instagram, and one of them posted this news and said, like, you know, oh, now they're coming for Sikhs too. They're coming for all the minorities. And I don't think that's like, I don't think it's coming for the Sikhs, or it's, in this case, if this did actually, theoretically, it's applying the standards in a equal way. In a theoretically, it's supposed to be about parity. Now, in terms of the application of it, it wasn't. Is this in general? Of course not. I just thought that was kind of like, well, in general, like there shouldn't be this exception. And but Harris is saying, when he gave you that pushback and then you replied, he's saying, I agree with you and my position is the same.
Yeah. And he is also saying, I think they will eventually go for all religious symbols. Okay. It would be more defendable.
They can't.
They can't? Like, yeah, I mean, imagine not a single Sikh would be able, like, yeah, I can't imagine in India where Sikh people cannot go get public education if they have their turbans on. That would be like, yeah, that's unimaginable. I mean, it might happen, but I can't imagine it. Maybe.
Well, how likely are they to enforce that students aren't allowed to have like their various caste markings as well? I don't find that very likely either.
All right, we have a lot of start comments. We have to go on.
Yeah. Oh, so that's actually what I was moving to. So, Bulbul, who is our local Indian lawyer, was explaining some of the problems with this to Harris, saying no, they'll never enforce it against basic Hindu cultural symbols. And two, unlike France, they can't practically force parents to send their kids to school. So this is an instance where Armin and I have to tackle with our ideals and principles versus the consequences. So in France, they have a system that, in theory, I don't know how effective it is, but they have systems that track children and whether they are going to school. They're not allowed.
It is effective.
Okay, yeah. I haven't looked at the data, so that's why I was qualifying it. But because the hijab is banned for students under the age of 18. So a lot of people push back on this, not because they support the hijab, but because they say, well, if there are families where if their daughters are not wearing the hijab, they will not allow them to go to school. But in France, they have this system that ensures that they are receiving schooling. Okay. But the difference here in India is that cannot practically be ensured. And so the consequence to enforcing these types of bans against religious symbols would be that millions of girls would not be receiving education. So they're saying that by banning the hijab indirectly, they are denying these girls their right to.
This is what happened. This is what happened in Iran when Reza Shah banned the hijab. There were many women that got locked, that just stayed home for like years, right? So this is why we could support the France model more than, even if it was consistent in India, the consequences, if the consequences is like less education for women, then we shouldn't be supporting it. France, again, we might sound hypocritical because we're supporting it in France, but not in India. But the difference is you cannot not go to school in France. Okay, so that's not going to be a consequence in France. So that's why it's easier to support it in France than in India. The main thing, like, as much as we're anti-hijab, anti-religion, anti-modesty culture, you're not just you're not like saving women from modesty culture if you're like denying them education. You know what I mean? So education is like the foundation of everything. If you care about
their empowerment and ability to choose, women will most likely be enabled to enact their autonomy if they're educated enough to secure individual financial stability for themselves.
Okay, I don't need to add anything to that. That was the best way to phrase what I was trying to say. That was like
so if that's your goal, it's antithetical to what you're working towards.
Exactly. But again, these people don't care about empowering Muslim women. These people care about being anti-Muslim women. Okay, so if we're like against hijab and modesty culture, is because we are in favor of liberating women from these level of oppression. But these people, like, if they're anti-hijab, it's not because they care about the woman who's being oppressed by the hijab. It's because they hate the Muslims, including the hijabi woman. They just want to see them suffer. They just want to see them suffer. They get joy out of seeing Muslims suffer. That's why they're in for. If Muslims be angry, they be happy.
Well, I think it's more than that. I think they hate to see a public display of Muslim identity, because that's what the hijab is. That Muslim women in particular carry, but Muslim men do not necessarily carry that same thing.
Yes, exactly. All right, let's go to the next comment. So,
Bulbul is okay, so Mother Earth is saying the ruling is only for government colleges. Private colleges can do as they like. Yes, this is true. If you are, say, like a Christian school, you're allowed to, not allow certain kinds of clothing. Nanda is saying you are talking out of ignorance. There's a difference between compulsory in turban versus optional hijab.
Okay, Nanda, you're a moron. Nanda is a moron because he or she thinks that this law is about which religious symbols are mandatory and which religious symbols are not mandatory. This is about banning religious symbols from education. This is not about making a judgment on description. This is not about you. Yes.
It kind of is. So
well,
this is on the basis of different precedents that have happened in Indian law, both within the state and throughout the nation. So there are various precedents in terms of what is allowed to be banned, and you are not allowed to ban certain things if it is deemed an essential, and the word is essential, obligatory part of the process or of the faith.
Okay.
And this is why lawyers are bringing up the Quran in court.
You don't understand what I'm saying. What I'm saying, our argument is not about which one is more, because it's insane that lawyers and judges and the law is using scripture to see the meaning behind how mandatory the hijab is or what the Islam teaches about the hijab. Is irrelevant. The fact, it's so India's legal system is so backwards. Okay, it's so unbelievably pathetic and embarrassing when the lawyers actually have to bring scripture to a secular country is investigating scripture in their course to decide which religious symbols they want to be against. You're a goddamn government. You have to be against. You shouldn't be picking and choosing between religions. Okay, if you want to be against religious symbols, you're going to be against religious symbols. You're not going to do a Quran reading in the court to decide how aggressively Islam pushes the hijab or it doesn't. Okay, our religious symbols are not as mandatory as yours based on our scripture relative to your scripture, so ours should be allowed and yours shouldn't be allowed. Are you serious? It's kind of like governments being involved in reading magic spells and comparing magic spells with each other to decide what should be legal and what shouldn't be legal.
The state the state should have no interest in making theological judgments.
Exactly. See, you always phrase it better than everything I want to say. You phrase it better in one sentence. But yeah, that's what Susanna said. And the fact that you think that this should be the argument, Nanda, makes you an idiot. Okay. Theirs is worse, so there shouldn't be allowed, and ours should be allowed. Oh, my fairy tales are better than theirs fairy tales, so the symbols of my fairy tales would not violate secularism, but the symbols of their fairy tales would violate this secularism. Okay, Nanda, grow the fuck up. All right.
Oh boy, our local anti-Muslim bigot, Hindupa Susanna, said every private school should ban Muslim students. Let them go to madrasas and learn from pervy Maulvis.
I'm so grateful that we have Hindutva in the live chat so we could highlight the way they think, just so that people know that these are the actual commentary, the actual viewpoint of people who defend Hindutva. Okay, you see the level of bigotry that exists in India. This represents that. Okay, so we don't even need to say anything. We just need to highlight it. It's so disgusting. It's so bigoted that all we need to do is just highlight it.
Also, Hindupa Susanna, it's against your own interests. Isn't there a huge push by the government to disincentivize going to the frickin' madrasa? Because this is where people get bad Islamic messaging. I don't want people going to the madrasas. Why would you push them into it? Dumbass. Bulbul is saying the same BJP politicians who are supporting the hijab ban in schools were previously crying about how not allowing the Mangal Sutra for teachers in schools is anti-Hindu and must be actioned. All right, I think you meant sanctioned. The Mangal Sutra, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but my understanding is that it's like a necklace, like an auspicious necklace that married women wear to like protect them from men and evil spirits. Tell me if I'm wrong. Forever Stormy is saying India's judiciary is an embarrassment.
It is an embarrassment, and it's still better than their political system. Like, it's still as embarrassment as it is, as big of an embarrassment as it is. It's still a good check on like whatever bigoted nonsense. Like, we still can rely on the judiciary system to be more mature than the political parties. So,
in defense of India's legal system, they had to inherit a lot of BS, okay, from the British government. And not only that, they had to find a way to try to hold the nation together by a thread post-independence. Okay, so a lot of the different rules that we see for different communities nowadays seem very confusing, but at the time, it was intended to hold a semblance of a unified Indian identity when a kind of a national identity wasn't one that really existed in the same way beforehand. So when I think about these things, I really have to consider like the socio-historical context, and then it makes a lot more sense. But the problem is that as a nation, it's kind of grown out of those, and we need to see something new. Secular Rarity is saying, hold on. Before we pass judgment on the defendant today, I think we should all hear about what Dumbledore has to say about unicorns.
Yeah, exactly. That's what India's justice system sounds like. Okay. So, yeah, read this one, and then we'll go to the next news.
Geisha American is saying, my fairy tales have replicating monkeys and flying dragons, therefore are superior fairy tales.
True.
Atheist Republic needs your help. We've been the target of many legal attacks by Hindu nationalists ever since our founder, Armin Navabi, blasphemed against Hindu deities. We have retained legal counsel to help us defend our access to our community in India. We have started a fundraiser that will help us afford to tackle many legal issues, including judicial harassment and censorship. Whatever you can contribute will go a long ways in helping us in this fight. Link in the description below.